Thank you for joining us today. We are going to have a TrustChain conversation about what happens when third-party risk becomes operational risk. A package, a workflow, a token, an integration, an OAuth grant can become the path into an organization. The question is not whether the vendor was properly assessed with their with the third-party risk questionnaire. The question is whether the enterprise can detect, contain, and recover when inherited trust is abused. Today, I'm grateful to have an old friend of mine, Joe McManus. We go back too many years, Joe, but thank you for joining us, and we'll focus on your role at Grafana as CISO today, and I'll have you provide a little bit more context about that, but grateful for you to share more about your incident response. Also, my colleague Mike Saxton at Booz Allen, he leads SOAR orchestration for commercial clients at Booz Allen, and my buddy Terry O'Daniel, fractional CISO and member of our TrustChain working group. Grateful to have you join us as well and share perspectives. So I'll start with Joe. Again, thank you for joining. I have to acknowledge that few organizations are as transparent relative to their response and recovery from an incident. And, I think you deserve a great deal of credit for what you've done at Grafana. Can you help us as a security community understand what you went through? And obviously, we don't want to get into any sensitive details of the incident other than what you've publicly already shared, which is amazing. So if you could kind of walk us through kind of what happened and where you're at today.
I'm super happy to talk about that, Greg. When you have an incident, it's not just how it impacts your company and your employees and your data, it's all of your customers. So, we've seen in the past companies will hide the information, or they'll be really cagey and release a little bit at a time. And that doesn't build trust. It doesn't help the industry. It also doesn't help trust within your own company. Greg, you and I had worked in the past, when I was at CERT and when you were at USPS, and what we were doing impacted so many people. And I learned a lot there. And that was that transparency builds trust. So what happened at Grafana was that we were impacted by the TanStack supply chain incident. So, Grafana is a very large code base. It is open source, so if you don't use it yet, one of the important things to know is that our source code is publicly available. You can make a contribution, it will get reviewed, but it is out there. And that changes the threat profile for Grafana than many other companies. So most people have a private GitHub repo. Ours is out there. You can track what's happening. So we pulled in this NPM package, TanStack. We thought we had Renovate set up with a 3-day holding period. So we wouldn't be hit by this because we looked, almost all of these incidents are detected within 24 hours. We had this as a transitive dependency, that something was being pulled in directly via Git, not via NPM. So we pulled this in, it set off alerts. We're using Sigma rules. We're a huge contributor to the open source Sigma rule community. Sigma rules fired. This is not our first dance. I was briefing my SLT saying, hey, 2026 is the year of supply chain incidents. So we've had a number of small supply chain incidents. We've handled them all. This one came up. The intelligence we had from the community said that it had to execute a specific way for it to have compromised credentials. We thought we rotated every credential that had been impacted. Yeah, we missed one. So we missed one. This supply chain, we thought we rotated everything. We thought we moved on. Now, if you know anything about me, I am a mountain biker. I was out mountain biking, and my phone dings. I'm not going to check that. This is my time. Then my phone rings. And all I could think was, there was an incident. So I stop, look at my phone. The Coinbase cartel was asking for millions of dollars, or they would release our source code. Now, you could go to the FBI and they'll tell you to not pay because they're just encouraging not only this actor, but other actors to go after you. We're an open source company. We're transparent. So, I really am happy about this relationship I have with my CEO. Give a call and say, we should not pay. Let's follow the advice of the FBI and be a leader in the security community by not paying. Also, let's be honest, they're going to release the code anyhow, right? We're going to call it a Better Business Bureau to the dark web. It's going to be out there. So all you're going to do is drag this out. So we decided not to pay. We started mitigating. We started rotating credentials. We actually took decisive action right away. We effectively shut down GitHub. We shut down all actions as we rotated tokens. Then we implemented a ton of things. I'm just going to take a moment to talk about one of the really cool things we did was create a token broker. So now we have incredibly short-lived tokens in GitHub for actions. They're scoped for just the run of the incident, the run of the action. They're scoped down to, if you start thinking about like OAuth, they're scoped down to just what needs that individual action to run, and they're never seeing a private key. They're only seeing this one key, and it's, we implemented that, moved every single action behind that. We reviewed every single piece of source code that had been committed for the time period from when this happened, so from the 11th to the 15th, and then we slowly got back into it. But we also took this opportunity to say, I'm not going to fix this. I'm not going to fix just for this incident, which we did. We put in mitigating controls for this incident. We spent a week doing a week of security. We originally had a hackathon schedule that we said, let's just do a security week instead. And the entire company committed to improving security. So we got rid of tokens, we de-scoped apps. We weren't really full force into it. And then proceeded to do tons and tons of fixes. But then we had a regular hackathon just last week. Which is pretty cool that we do this in Grafana. 1 week every quarter, we dedicate to hackathons. And we've never before said, your hackathon has to be in this subject. We said, this is a security hackathon. Make us better. We want to raise the bar so the next time there's an incident, we reduce the blast radius. Because let's not kid ourselves. There will always be an incident. Let's get back to fundamentals of computer science, right? I was a professor for a number of years. So think of that day one lecture, compartmentalization, privilege separation, and the CIA triad. So we have built amazing apps in this last week that we're going to work into our open source product and our platform. And so that is what happened at the company. We enforce Renovate now. We've started auditing to make sure we don't have any of these transitive dependencies. But really, it's our whole CI/CD process. We're going to compartmentalize more. We're going to split up our public repos from what actually moves to our cloud. So we've got more compartmentalization there and more privilege separation. And just treat it like I used to be the head of security for Ubuntu Linux. And we're going to treat it like we pulled down a package from upstream Debian. So that's how we're working. And I probably took too much time there, Greg. But this is a fascinating supply chain incident that happened. And I think our response to it was pretty darn good. We did not leak the most important thing we leaked no customer data. There was no access to our production systems. And that was the most important thing we could do.
Yeah, that's awesome, Joe. Just maybe two follow-ups before we open it up a little bit. Obviously, coming to the realization that this is your incident to lead. Obviously, it's a supply chain attack. It wasn't your problem to begin with. How do you, as a leader, think about the boundary between what you need to protect and what is your dependencies from a ecosystem perspective for you to own and lead the response?
Well, it's really like we can't get TanStack to fix anything. That's their project. They'd already identified it and fixed it. What I need to consider is, how do I protect my company, Grafana, going forward? And what's really interesting, you're talking about incident response. There's a lot going on during an incident like this. We are I was putting in 20-hour days. We're a global company, so we were doing handoffs. But this is, CISO, there's a responsibility. We had to figure out, okay, there's a lot of people on these calls. Who do I need to kick out? I don't want someone to burn their weekend just because they feel like they're learning something. So what I started doing was, hey, checking in. What is everybody working on? What is the end of shift handoff? At any point in time, I should be able to look at my incident response doc and figure out what is our current status. So we started implementing check-ins. We also, this is really important. I was like, take a break, step away from your computer. We had been on for like 10 hours. Like, hey, everybody, turn your cameras off. I don't see anybody typing. Go on. And also, like, hey, expense that meal. I get people bonuses because this was like, I mean, yes, we work in tech. We sometimes are on call and do long hours. This was exceptional. But really, don't think about just the technical controls you're putting in place, because you can document that. You can go to Gemini, you can go to Claude, you can get some tips for that. Think about managing your staff and your people. Don't overreact and shut down all of your production site with a Cloudflare rule because you're moving too fast, right? Don't forget your policies and procedures. So really think about what you're doing. Think about your staff. Think about their mental health. Think about how you can communicate to your customers, and then start dividing and conquering, right? I spent more time with my legal team during this incident than I did with the engineers, because I have great directors I can hand things off to and check in with them. So understand as a leader where you're best suited to help.
Yeah, that's awesome, Joe. Again, so grateful for the transparency and the leadership that you've made. And, the Grafana brand is only that much greater because of what you're doing. I'd love to turn the attention to Mike for a moment. Obviously, classic SOC detection events, you know, are usually internally focused. In this kind of AI era supply chain, the SOC needs to be able to detect these third-party events. How should we as practitioners be thinking about these events, and how do they show up in a security operations capability?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Grant. Again, it's really exciting to hear from Joe what Grafana did. A company that I admire. I think trust and transparency is incredible, especially in the open source community. And for those of us that don't get to work in that community, we certainly learn a lot and try to implement it the best that we can. But when I look at what's going on today with the AI or with supply chain and the kind of the AI era. For those of us that have been around a while, we remember things like Heartbleed and, the target attack. And we started talking about third party then, and then it kind of fell out of vogue. When I think it really became popular again for sort of this era of security folks was around Log4j. And so Log4j became massively popular and everybody got really excited. And security teams realized, like non-product security teams, suddenly realized we have no application logs all of a sudden. So we have no visibility into things that are much further down. And we kind of went into this very dangerous loop of like every citizen security person wanting to help by putting stuff on GitHub. And all of a sudden we ran into like, which script should I actually be downloading from GitHub? Because I no longer know which one is safe. And so I see a lot of that today happening primarily in two spaces. The first one is a lot of the new AI technologies that are coming out. MCP servers are really great, but I have not met an MCP server on GitHub that I actually want to use in a production environment. I think the second one is the bigger adoption of AI tool, or I'm sorry, developer tooling. So capabilities like Cursor and Windsurf and Copilot are really great, but the attack surface that they're now exposing is a lot of the extensions that they have available. And that's not a traditional trust model that non-product security teams have really ever dealt with. And as somebody who lives in an IDE every single day, it's even confusing for me on which named product I should download. And I have to be very careful to go to the blue checkmark one and not any of the other ones that feel the same. I think the last thing I'll say is with the broader sort of supply chain and I'll use GitHub as just as the example, because I think it's the most relevant to this use case, this topic right now. One of the big challenges that we have seen is people wanting to do things smartly. And so one of the first things that people like to do is say, I probably want to give my SOC visibility into what I'm doing with, AI. And then we end up in the world of like post-light LLM that happened, which was just, tremendous across the industry. And so it's just a very interesting environment to be in today. I think the one thing I will say, and back to Joe's point, I think governance is incredibly important here. I think we're going away in security from the days of thou shalt do what this policy says, and the security office becoming much more of the I have prevented you from doing anything bad, but everything else is just going to be allowed to happen, and I have full visibility into what I've told you can't do.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a lot of really good points, Mike. And Terry, we've had a lot of conversations in the TrustChain working group around these topics. And, Mike was talking about which ones do I trust from a dependency perspective. How should we be thinking about vendors? Not, we bash the old assessment, risk assessment methodologies. How do we observe inherited trust and how these packages should behave? And, where do we need to be thinking from a third-party risk management perspective that our activities need to evolve?
Well, first of all, there's been so much good detail shared so far, and I don't know where to start, but let's start with your last question, which is, where should we start? I think that's the security community is a very pragmatic one. We all know that our reach extends further than our grasp, and we have to just ruthlessly prioritize and figure out what's important today. And we've definitely seen that over the past 18 months, right? Where the pace of from Gen AI and the commercial LLMs to agentic AI and now digital twins, you just have to be light-footed and you have to keep on top of these things. So I think one of the first things I'll call out is I love to hear us talking about risk. I love to hear us talking about governance. I think the challenge is when you say governance and ask a room of 20 people what governance means, you'll get 21 answers. And I think we're getting to a point where the role of security is no longer protecting systems and data. It's becoming much more around provenance, governance, decision support, being able to clarify how a decision should be made. The age of being able to say, to Joe's point earlier, there's this policy and either you follow the policy or not. I think that the scope of that doesn't scale anymore. So I think we have the opportunity to really polish up governance and not have it be a fussy word where when I think of governance, I think of committee meetings and things like that. And we have the opportunity to reclaim it and really turn it into something usable and tactical and technical, which goes hand in hand with risk. Risk management is primarily for security resource management. We have a limited amount of resources and we have to figure out day by day where to apply them most effectively. That's tough because we're never going to have enough resources to make everything secure. But the way we did risk assessments previously, and I'll be the first to say horrible things about heat maps and managing risk by color and things like that. But what else could we do, right? I worked at Netflix where we had the luxury of having a dedicated team of quantitative risk analysts in our security function. Not every company can say that. But here we are now. We're in the age of broad adoption of LLMs and agentic AI. You should be able to throw large sets of data into a model and get real tangible risk results almost instantly. That is something we didn't have before. So I think one of the areas where we can choose as an industry to sort of step up is to say, this red, yellow, green stuff is ridiculous. We should be able to assess risk in dollars. And it's not a 3-week consulting exercise. It's almost instantly. So one thing I'd love to see is, we as a community can push for that, but how do we actually get that in line so those decisions can be made both from a detection and prevention standpoint, but again, where do we choose to apply those resources?
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a lot of really good points, Terry. And in this particular situation with you, Joe, the third party attack was identity, automation, workflow, real tangible, tokens and account, GitHub Actions, OAuth grants, the whole kind of technology dependency supply chain from a code perspective. How do you think about those things now as supply chain dependencies?
Well, it's actually interesting. I'm going to disagree with Terry here. I think, or maybe just to add on to what he said, right? I think in the past, security was a group of no, right? You said no to everything, and you had a little value by saying, but you made a bunch of policies saying no, right? Made it so people couldn't use their jobs or use their computers. They would work around you. That's how you get shadow IT. I think what you actually have to do now is, I don't use like governance as code, but when you identify you have a policy that you're always going to use, that you're not going to use Vault, not GitHub secrets, that you implement something in code that prevents secrets from being created. So like on our side, we actually, every new, if we can't disable secret creation in GitHub. So what we do is we actually monitor every time the secret is created, it's immediately deleted. And then we send that person a message in Slack saying, here's our guide to how to use Vault, right? So it's that combination of you set a policy that people can use, and then where possible, because you can't do this everywhere, we don't want to lock down laptops so people can't work. What you do is you set up policy enforcement with controls, but not in a heavy-handed way where you can't do your job. So I think that's actually what Terry was saying. So I just kind of, my take on that was like, yeah, you shouldn't do that. But when it comes to the supply chain risk, I just started this question off with, Greg.
Yeah.
Like, everybody will sell you a magic snake oil tool that will solve your supply chain risk. And I just haven't seen one that will work. So really, it actually comes back to like the fundamentals, right? How can you protect? How can you de-scope anything that can have any of your tokens, any of your authorization boundaries? How can you compartmentalize as much as possible? And then make sure that before anything gets to prod, it is just absolutely analyzed, that there's some sort of human in the loop. That's not just going for, like in our case, being an open source company, that a public repo will never make it to prod without an employee reviewing some sort of change. So that is super important from my perspective. I wish I could spend some money and solve this problem, but I haven't seen a tool. I'm assuming after people hear this, I'm going to get 1,000 more salespeople to contact me. But like, I just haven't seen one that's working. Also, by the way, salespeople, in like the days after an incident, I don't need 500 LinkedIn connections, right? I'm not reading any of them. I'm not buying from you. Hey, come on, have some flexing, people.
I love that, Joe. Thank you, buddy. I love your approach and transparency. Mike, when you think about what Joe went through, I don't think many organizations are really prepared to be able to lead through the types of response that Joe made. In that first situation response, what should a security operations capability be looking for relative to their open source dependencies, their package ecosystem? Generally, are security operations capabilities prepared to be able to go through this? And what should that first 60 minutes look like for a prepared organization?
Yeah, I think before we even get into what should they do, I would say immediately right now is begin baselining your environment. Like start doing that. I often hear things like, I remember the sort of the pre-zero trust days was like asset management is really hard. And I'm like, well, all of the hosts are sitting in your SIM. Why don't you just sort of build your own from that? At least you have something rather than saying this is really hard. So I think in terms of how to get ready, the first thing is implementing SBOM type policies or implementing what sort of services, applications, protocols currently exist on the network. And I have enough experience to say that whatever is on paper is 100% not what is actually being reported in a production level environment. And so that's the first thing, because the first couple minutes of an incident has always been where is this thing? Do we have it? Does it even exist? I mean, I think we've all maybe sort of gone through cycles for maybe an hour of like, oh, wait, that thing that hit the news, it's not actually in our system anywhere. So why are we even worrying about this? So that's the number one thing I think people should do is baseline today. But at the bigger level, the next thing would be to start maybe tabletop exercises or planning for these types of events. You know, Grafana was open about what happened. Terry said, throw stuff in an LLM and get results. Take the after action from Grafana, throw it into an LLM and generate a tabletop exercise to just walk yourself through these processes. I can't emphasize enough that the first thing you should, the kind of stage zero should be just preparing for it to begin to happen. So once it actually happens, though, I think the first thing is recognizing what we traditionally call as something of like your minimum viable company. And we view this as really the aspect of in this like mythos world as well. So there's going to be vulnerabilities. To Joe's point, there's going to be breaches. What is the core component of your organization, if you're not a product company, that you must absolutely protect? And from this incident, what is the risk to that core component? If the core component of your company is to produce widgets, then any endpoint that isn't directly related to widget creation should probably just get turned off, ignored, not focused on. The shift of that security team should be focused on that core effort. And for most organizations, that security team is maybe a dozen people at most. It's not a lot of people compared to the size of employees that exist within the organization. So start preparing now. The first phase is definitely focus on how you can shrink down the response into what is going to keep your business running and what is going to keep the core focus of your organization up and running. And once you can do those two, the rest of the incident process, we're pretty good with. We might not run the full, gambit of nation state intrusions on a regular basis, but we've got some pretty good experiences in daily run books, daily playbooks that have been implemented, and the tech team can go from there. I will add one more thing, and to Joe's point, that's a very incident level SOC perspective. One of the challenges we see a lot of organizations struggling with is the upward notification of these types of attacks. So if you're the CISO, how do you go from the CISO to the CIO? How does the CIO go to the CEO? How does the CEO go to the board? How does the board work with legal, marketing, compliance, trade? Like all of those different things are unfortunately often learned in the attack itself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Mike. And that leads right into the question that I want to pose to Terry. And that is, in the working group, we talk about chain of authority, like Mike was talking about. In these complex third-party risk management situations, how do we, where do the lines of authority land, right? Is it risk? Is it procurement? Is it GRC? We've talked about some of that today. How does it land in a mature information security practice like Joe's? He takes accountability and owns it and shows the world what Grafana can do. But you and I have seen it different in other organizations. What's your perspective on this accountability and responsibility aspect?
Yeah, I think it's a great topic. And as a horrible example of what not to do, I have been involved in an incident where it was messy and it dealt with, basically was a internal foot guns kind of incident. And it ultimately involved customer contact, and the organization put our head of sales in charge of determining how we would respond to that incident. You can imagine the conflict of desired outcomes there, and I am very much a person who will lean into transparency. I imagine Joe and I would get along very well, and it was very difficult to, in the moment, on the fly, while everyone's stressed and lack of sleep, not having those things decided in advance. When we decided that customer communications had to happen, everyone sort of looked at my 3-person security team and said, so you folks will take care of that, right? No, that's not our job. So I think one of the things, and I love Mike who's calling out, preparation. One of the things we have to do is not just have a policy, not just have a SERP or something like that, but really going through the fine-tuned details. And you can't do that without something tangible to work off of. As Mike said, take the Grafana example and run it through your own tabletop exercises and see how you would have responded. Find the things where there is a missing piece. Determine those roles and responsibilities beforehand. And get on my soapbox a little bit, since I come from a background of mostly network engineering, infrastructure engineering, operations, things like that. The good thing is that security incidents are much less frequent than operational engineering incidents. The bad news is you don't develop the same muscle memory. If you're in a NOC or a SOC, you just have to learn real quick. Like, you need to know that at 4 a.m. when you get the call, that you can, while half asleep, get to a reasonable state. And the only way to do that is to have really clear flowchart type approaches, not a 20-page policy that I'm not going to read in the middle of the night. And you have to get those lines of accountability and build a racing matrix if you have to. But you have to determine those in advance. And then for those of us on the security team, SecOps is often considered second tier function in security, right? The most important stuff is really the AppSec and CloudSec, maybe InfraSec, and then SecOps gets a second tier. And that really shoots us in the foot when we're under the gun and everything's on fire and we really have to drill it. I don't know if the person who is on call has any SecOps experience. I don't know if they've been through the fire, but I can do something about it. I can train. I can just relentlessly drill through these exercises until everyone is very bored with them. I want people to be bored with them. I want people to be able to bring that boredom into the actual incident itself, because then you're not running around trying to figure out who's accountable for what and how should we solve this, because that's the worst time to do it.
Yeah, these multi-team responses are so critical, and having those predefined responses exercised and wrote are so important. I want to turn the focus to Joe to talk about. I love all of the things that you're doing post-incident, and you talked about the internal activities that you're making. What is one area or operating discipline that you would tell CISOs that aren't prepared for these kinds of incidents to pressure test in the next quarter?
So actually, I'm going to build off what Terry said there. You want to have actually Terry and Mike, we both talk, all of us talk about this now, your incident response plan. So don't wait till an incident, right? Do your tabletop exercise. Make sure you know that if you email this channel, who that is, right? But also, things aren't going to work right. So make sure you, as the CISO, have the ability to go into Workday, Oracle, whatever your system is, and get people's phone numbers to text them, because the person who's on call is not replying and you need their manager online, right? You also, there's a little group, I think, Greg, you might know them, the NCCIC. Well, they have a rubric that will help you score an incident, right? So in your incident response policy, have a definition for how you rate an incident. I don't want to email my CEO every time that someone's WAF is compromised. No. Have a scoring saying if it meets the critical phase, if it touches customer data, then at that point you email a synopsis within X number of hours of discovery to the C-suite that that your senior leadership team is always up to speed. That you give, I think you can follow a plan, but it's every 4 hours at the end of day, and then as the week goes on, you're doing it at the end of every day until you can close out. There's no more operational things, but have that developed. Also, as was mentioned earlier, have that matrix. Here's who you work with in marketing. Here's who you work with in customer support. Because you, as a CISO, you think you can talk to all of these customers who have questions. You cannot. You do not scale. Have a process for intake of questions. A process for your account executives to respond to them, not you. Have a legal team set up that can handle it, because you need to have things proofread before you talk to your your team. So if you could have all that set up. The other thing I would just add on, and Mike talked about this, you need to know what normal is before you can know what abnormal is, right? There's a little tool, I'm going to say it's called Grafana, that you can set up as open source, or if you want to run the cloud, we give you 2 weeks free. You can use a tool like that, discover what normal is. If all of a sudden you have an API endpoint that's being hammered on, discover it, right? Know it before your customers know and reach out to you saying, why is this not working, right? So that is one of the most, if you do not know what normal is, you will never be able to detect abnormal. Also, while you're determining your baseline, you'll find those gaps. So why aren't I seeing this traffic from my DNS servers? Oh, because I'm not logging in anywhere. I don't have Route 53 configured to send things to locate, whatever your tool is. So yeah, get all that set up and get your process. Don't develop a process on the fly. You don't want to figure out how to use your fire extinguisher when there's something burning in your car, right? You fired off one time beforehand and think how these things work. Also, it's kind of fun.
I love it, Joe. Love your response. I couldn't agree with you more. And, I lead a training class at Black Hat every year on multi-team systems, and it's critical to have all of those dependencies mapped and boundary spanning defined in an incident in order to be effective. Mike, I'm going to give you a choose your own answer way here. Telemetry. Joe talked about some things that, from a telemetry perspective, that many teams might be missing in these kinds of incidents. I'd love your opinion on that. And then on the playbook side, what do we need to be thinking about relative to building for these kinds of token OAuth type compromise situations?
Yeah. Those are both meaty topics. I think on the topic of token use, I think one of the first thing, or token compromises, etc. I think the first thing is to understand if you have anything in place today, and if you don't need to create it. GitHub exists. Policies exist. Organizations like Grafana, organizations like GitLab have done a tremendous job at open sourcing and being an open-facing company in what they do. Grab their stuff and rewrite it specifically for your internal purposes. As someone that kind of grew up in the SecOps community, that's what started. Everybody was sharing information back in the day. That was kind of how we all got started. But to the point on OAuth and identity, I think the first one is understand where those things are used, how your identity is put into place, and how it is being leveraged. And I think that right now is a great time for any security department to really start doubling down on understanding how identity is used across their organization. And I would even say that that should be number one before you go buy any tool or product that promises non-human identity visibility. Understand what you even have to begin with is probably the starting place. And when you do that, it has to go above and beyond users. So often we get so focused on the general base of what exists within our system, because some of us aren't at, as I mentioned, product companies where we don't think about this in terms of OAuth tokens and Java Web Tokens and just-in-time authentication and stuff. We think about how does my user log in and I have MFA and my email is protected. So I think you really need to have a good visibility over just the general identity, types of identity that are deployed across your organization. Yeah. I can't remember what the first question was, Greg, because my mind got directed.
No, I think you did an excellent job. The other one was about playbooks, but I'll turn that over to Terry if that would be okay. Terry, when you think about one playbook that every organization should have in these kinds of situations, what kind of discipline should be incorporated from a token or OAuth compromise perspective?
I think there's a lot of great approaches there, and it's a longer conversation, but there's a lot of good tactical approaches you could take there. I think the problem, getting back into the trust chain and the software supply chain, I love the idea of baselining. I love to hear that you're both so bullish on baselining. I think it's amazing. why isn't it working, right? And I think part of the problem comes down to we're still treating software supply chain like a GRC function. And I've done time in the GRC trenches. It's not pretty. I remember when I was at Yahoo and an auditor came around and said, oh, we need a list of all changes made in Hadoop last quarter. I said, oh, okay, well, just pull your truck up to the loading dock and I'll start printing them out. There's a mismatch between what do we do with a vendor questionnaire? How does that turn into actual security changes? Do we re-baseline every time we bring on a new vendor? There's a gap there that's missing. And I think that's the root of a lot of these problems. If we treat it truly as a security discipline, we can do better, but who has the time, who has the resources? So I think, and that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to be involved in TrustChain, we have the opportunity, we have new tools, we have a rapidly evolving technical ecosystem that forces us to revisit first principles. We can talk about least privilege and zero trust until we're blue in the face, and yeah, it's nice to hear, but now it's real. Now you can't just rely on the old way of monitoring these things and putting prevention in place. So I think we have an amazing opportunity. We obviously have a challenge, and I think it's time for us to step up a little bit and say, there's a broken piece of the vendor security questionnaire theater that does not turn into real results. It gives us a false sense of security, and it's not actually making things better. So while I think the playbooks on the right are very important, I think a lot of these problems will be solved by the root cause of not separating so much the business and procurement piece from the actual technical security.
Yeah, love that, Terry. That's kind of the heart of the TrustChain and why we're doing this. Real quick, we'll lightning round here to finish up. Joe, what is one thing that should be rehearsed before an organization goes through the next supply chain incident?
Making sure you can export your logs, that you can store them securely. So if you need to turn them all over for discovery or for a third-party forensic auditor, you know how to do this. Don't try to figure it out. Like, I don't know, it's going to take 27 hours. Just make sure you know how to do this ahead of time. That's, I would say, one of the most important things.
That's awesome. Mike, same question to you. What needs to be rehearsed before your next supply chain incident?
Plan for that cloud outage that your SIM is currently deployed into.
Wow. Yeah, that would be a tough one, Mike. Terry, to you, my friend.
I think I covered a little bit of it, but I think not treating the supply chain as a business function, finding our footing when we've all been through the case where someone comes down the chain in a business context and says, we're going to use this vendor. Okay, that's fine. That's a business decision. But what mechanisms do we have to have that conversation? Risk acceptance forms never worked to begin with. So here we are. It's the modern era. We are forced to come up with something real. Let's step up and do that.
Yeah, and I think we've really learned a lot in today's conversation. Joe set quite a frame for us all with the transparency that he led with the incident at Grafana that he led the organization through, and all of the customers that are dependent upon Grafana to understand. That's what we're attempting to do at TrustChain. Each of my colleagues here today talked about really an important aspect of this. We need to exercise this from a incident tabletop exercise perspective. And one of the things that I'd like to invite the listeners to do is on Wednesday, August 26th, through the TrustChain, the TrustChain Working Group, we are going to do just what each of them recommended. We are going to do a group tabletop exercise where we will lead a set of companies through a tabletop exercise. And each of those companies will participate in their own private Zoom room and will come together and work through a third-party risk management issues. So look forward to more details about how we're going to execute that in the coming months, or in the coming month as we prepare. But I think really operationalizing what Joe, Mike, and Terry recommended in this discussion today is really going to help a lot of organizations as we think about these third-party dependencies. And I hope Joe, Mike, and Terry can help us on that date if they would be available and willing to share their expertise and experience. So thank you, everyone. And I can't say enough about the level of professionalism and commitment to security that Joe, Mike, and Terry have provided today. Thank you, guys.